Hello, my friends and listeners of All Out Coach. This is your personal podcast that breaks down barriers between people, that pushes the boundaries of your responsibilities, your experiences, and your abilities. My name is Tim Mikhelishvili, and I'm your host. Before I introduce my special guest today, I want to tell you how I connected with her and why I invited her. Just over a year ago, I was invited to deliver a keynote presentation to a group of postdoctoral fellows at Rutgers University, where I spoke about the next generation leadership. And one of my central messages there was that a fellow, a student, a teacher is also a leader, a manager is also a leader, is also a coach and a trainer, because leadership is a responsibility, it's a choice, and it is a lifestyle as well. So when I came across a leadership course by our guest, Sara on LinkedIn Learning, the multiple roles of leaders, I immediately invited her. Sara is a senior executive, a leader with tremendous experience across different industries. She's a renowned keynote speaker, an author, and also a coach and an owner of a boutique leadership firm called Sara and Associates. I'll tell you that I am a student and a coach as well, and I've taken many leadership courses before, but her particular style, her personal style of the courses and of her own management vision is unique. It offers a lot of specific tips for the real world challenges that leaders face today in our ever demanding world in which we're living. So it's truly an honor and a pleasure to have you here for the first time on my show, All Out Coach, Sara. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm so humbled by that introduction. Thank you.
Today's topic is going to be how to pivot in challenging times. How have you managed the multiple roles of leadership throughout your life and your career?
Oh gosh. Fortunately, I've had a lot of different ways to express and experience leadership. I spent about 13 years in corporate in the very sexy industry of insurance, and no offense to any of your listeners, but this was years ago and things were pretty regulated. In fact, they still are heavily regulated. And there was a process for everything, right? But I left corporate to start my own business. So I've led both inside of a large corporation and also led a small team. And so I've had a variety of experiences. And that in and of itself has forced me to pivot, right? The way you lead a team of 12 in a corporation that is either, 1,500, 3,000 big, or whether you lead a small team for my own boutique firm, the needs are different. Not to mention, I think, whether it's inside or outside an organization, the climate's completely different, right? I reflect back to how I was as a leader, and I would say that my roles were very narrow, right? Back in the day, because I've been out of corporate now for 15 years, we weren't asked to be a leader coach. It was all about performance management. It was all about results and doing what we did or had to do to get those results. Not a lot of expression of taking sincere interest in people's development. There was no risk taking. So innovation wasn't talked about. So I would say that my roles were probably limited to the management side of leadership. I took it upon myself to do a little bit more on the leadership side. I tended to be the one in the office that was probably willing to be the most compassionately candid with people about what might be setting them back in their careers. Mm-hmm. So people tended to come to me for that. And that's where I started to really find a purpose in leadership. And that's what led me to pivot and leave corporate America and start my own firm.
I see. Were there some other people who impacted you throughout those pivotal moments in your life that you can think back to?
Absolutely. And I, like most people, I would say they impacted me both for the positive and the negative, right? I had some stellar leaders, and then I had leaders who were not so stellar.
Right.
But I learned from both of those, right? I learned as
Yeah.
much about what I wanted to do versus what I didn't want to do. But I had one leader in particular who was really just modeled the way for me. She did things that I had not seen other leaders do. So for example, she would read really good articles, whether it was about our industry or another industry, about any sort of micro innovation or something compelling. And she would always make sure to pass those nuggets on to her team. She'd literally route the article around, and this is back before we had email, inner office email stuff. And I also know that once a week, she purposely met with somebody outside of our organization who was either in or out of the industry just to network. So in that way, she opened my eyes to what it meant to build a strong network, not just in your community, but outside of your community.
Yeah.
And she was a key listener. I'll never forget, we had a team meeting once, and we had hired a new manager, and he was very sharp, but there was a pattern emerging at team meetings. He was always seemed to be the naysayer. And I remember at one point when we were off to ourselves after a meeting, I said, wow, that must be getting old and difficult. And she said, no, I like it. We need that.
Right.
And again, that's the kind of thing I think she was beyond her time.
And those are the types of people that impact us and push us, probably, I think.
Absolutely.
Between the time that you spend on stage across the United States and now probably more virtually to teach, what are some strategies you're using to pivot and to adapt to our reality?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing I did was two things, listen and learn. I needed to find out what leaders were most needing right now. So immediately after COVID hit us, and everybody was retooling, revamping, reworking, I really needed to listen in. And it wasn't really about what I typically provide, content or otherwise. I knew that I needed something that would help leaders in the moment. And the only way to do that was to listen and to ask and to read what was happening. And then also I had to learn. I had done some virtual training and, virtual workshops before, but never to the extent that I knew I was going to need to do it. So I took time to also learn about different platforms, how to make best use of the tools on the platform so that training and workshops could be more engaging and more participative. And I got to tell you, it is not a direct correlation. Transferring your workshop in person on stage takes a lot of work when you're translating it virtually.
Yeah.
You have to deconstruct the entire thing almost and start over because you need to provide a really highly participative experience.
Yeah. I mean, your workshop on multiple roles of leadership just prompted me to share it with my entire network just because of how engaging it was, how comprehensive it was, and also a lot of the specific tips that it offered. And so I think that it was clear that you dedicated a lot of yourself, your personality, and your time and all your experiences into that course. And I know you have many other courses on LinkedIn as well. So are you happy with the transition into virtual in terms of the responses you're getting from those you teach right now?
Yes. I mean, I miss being in person, but I am happy with the responses I'm getting because I'm making sure that I leave plenty of room, and I say leave room, that I pepper in interaction throughout, right? So it's my way of checking the pulse, right? If I can't see the audience, then I just need to ask questions throughout. I'll pepper it into a keynote even. It used to be that I would get on stage and speak for 30 minutes before we did anything highly engaging, but that's really difficult virtually. So I might cover my first point and then throw out something that will provoke thought, that will provoke a discussion. I'll let them know that we're going to be sharing that with thinking partners towards the end. And people really seem to like that. So yeah, I've been happy with the results so far.
Yeah. We have a mutual friend, Stan Phelps, who's a keynote speaker as well and TEDx speaker. And he often talks about that one of the most primal fears that we all have of speaking. So can you just describe maybe a situation where you really had to adapt when you were in a live setting, and how did what are some strategies you used?
Yeah, I think it's no different than virtual, and we all have faced that, right?
Yeah.
Our dogs start barking, or somebody walks in the room, or technology fails us.
Right.
I think the best thing to do is to just be candid and laugh and share, right? Be transparent with the audience. I mean, I've had a number of things happen where I'm in front of the audience and, I may have tripped over a cord,
Oh, wow.
but you have to laugh at yourself, right? I mean, if I'm uncomfortable on stage, the audience is uncomfortable.
Right.
And so you just have to make light of the situations that come about. And fortunately, I can't think of anything just dire or, tragic that happened while speaking.
I wouldn't ask for something tragic, but I think that point that you bring up, Sara, that if you are uncomfortable, then the audience is uncomfortable. I think it's such an important point for the listeners. I think for all of us aspiring speakers, and regardless of whether or not you want to become a speaker, I think you have to communicate, and communication is such a differentiator in success, regardless of the industry, right?
Absolutely.
I know you also write books, and in your book, you talk about not clinging to the familiar. So how do you kind of explore out into those possible unknown delights from those familiar horrors, if you will, right? How do you adapt? So what are some strategies that you teach?
Yeah. And, more than ever, I think some people are trying to cling to the familiar because, frankly, when there's uncertainty, that brings us comfort. But I would urge listeners to really rethink that, because right now we need to be dipping our toe in the water and experimenting, right? We need to be iterating, taking from Agile and Scrum. We need to try things on, to listen to how people are responding, customers, be them internal, external, and then adjusting and moving forward, right? It's about small incremental experiments. It doesn't have to be an earth-shattering innovation. Now, I know that a lot of people are saying easier said than done, and I'm actually one of those people. I like organized, planned, methodical. I've been that way all my life. And so I have been tested through the years, and especially now. And one of the first things I did, for example, right after the pandemic hit, is I had a whiteboard of 3 different ways I was going to consider getting out to a larger audience with video, right? So I could have pre-taped video messages, right? And that way I could control exactly what went out. I could edit, they could be polished. I could do what I was calling open office hours, and I would invite some of my followers to come and join me for a informal leadership coaching hour. And then the third option is I could go and do live, LinkedIn live sessions.
Yes.
And I purposely jumped to number 3. It was the one that made me the most uncomfortable,
right?
That I would have less control over. But I knew it would be a way to check the pulse of people in real time.
Yeah.
And send a message that was more timely. So that's just an example of the kinds of things that I think, instead of looking at this time as, I really don't want to do this, I want to cling to what I've always done. It's an opportunity to try things on. And I've heard that from a lot of people in all industries.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What a great example there. I know that we talk about Steve Jobs as a very charismatic speaker, but he wasn't a natural born speaker. It turns out he used to practice quite a lot, right? As we all know.
Yes.
And I did something very similar as well recently, because I know that, for example, personally, I have to prepare, before a presentation, for example. But I wanted to stretch myself. I wanted to connect with the audience, create a community. And very recently, probably a few months ago, I started to go live on Instagram, and I'm trying to go live on LinkedIn as well, but every Monday morning and every Friday at 8 a.m. to energize and to inspire people. And I talk about a lot of business topics. I review business books from MentorBox and others. I'm going to review a lot of points from your courses as well. It's on my plan, Sarah.
Excellent.
So yeah, I really find that your example so timely. On my last podcast, I had a guest. He's a leadership guru in the pharmaceutical industry,
Okay.
and he talked about a time when he really liked a particular candidate that he had to hire, and he's been an executive in sales, now a coach, and his manager just found that the candidate just wasn't ready. He hadn't passed he didn't really qualify. Hadn't passed the test, and so he just he actually disagreed with his boss, and he told him, "Look, this candidate offers a lot of things that others just won't, even if they pass the test. He has some qualities that you just can't teach." And so the boss made his executive, his manager, decided to allow him to hire this person, which gave him that freedom and empowered him. He had to go against what was familiar to him, and he had to do that a couple of times. But that candidate happened to be a top performer in sales and somebody who he still considers strongest professionals in the industry. So not clinging to the familiar is so important today in our generational gap. And I agree with you. What is your book, by the way? I'd like the listeners to know about the title of that book.
Sure. The book is called Leadership Unchained.
Thank you.
Defy Conventional Wisdom for Breakthrough Performance.
Okay.
And, interestingly enough, it was published and launched last year as a way to help leaders take back control of what gets their time and attention, and, try to find meaning and purpose in our always on do more world. Yeah. And little did I know that all the strategies in this book are even more important as a result of this pandemic. And, it is about letting go of old practices, but not necessarily bad practices. In some cases, what I suggest in the book is that we let go of some of the classic success practices, the things that all of us sort of grew up learning and watching and then trying to emulate. And so they're almost counterintuitive strategies. For example, the first chapter is on, balancing a bias for action with a bias for thought. Mm-hmm. Because today we are asked to both do more and think more. Yeah. Right. And we've always been told, at least I have been, that a bias for action is just the moniker of a good leader. And while that is mostly true, we have so much coming at us right now, data, meetings, white papers, and just firefighting, that we have got to force ourselves to take a strategic pause once a week. Now, I would say more than that, because we're working with no barriers. Right. And we really need to look at everything we've consumed. I call it also a mental time in. Mm-hmm. We're actually doing a lot during this break because we're looking at everything that we've consumed, read, heard, and we're making meaning from it. We're separating the signal from the noise. We are making connections that we may not have made in the moment. Yeah. And then more importantly, we're prioritizing and possibly taking action on things that otherwise would not have seen the light of day. I mean, think about it. How many times do we go to a meeting and either something that was said or something that you've put together sparks a brilliant idea, you write it down, you circle it, you put a star next to it, you walk out of the door, you go back to fighting fires. The idea never saw the light of day.
Right.
Right. So that's just one example of some of the counterintuitive strategies I talk about in the book.
I see. Yeah, I struggle with that actually very often, by the way. So why do some people adapt and others just cannot pivot for some reason, based on your experiences and people that you observe?
Yeah. Gosh, there seems to be such a spectrum. There's some people who thrive in uncertainty. They like the constant churn. It keeps them up. It keeps them on their toes. They like the, newness of things. And then there's others who, they want things done the way they've always been done. And then there's those in the middle. And I think the reason that some people thrive is as a mindset. Instead of pivoting as something that is happening to you, I have to pivot. I'm being forced to change. I think those that have the mindset of, okay, how can I use this time to evolve? Whether that's learn a new skill, upskill, take on a new project that nobody else wants, make suggestions for new services. I think a lot of it is, the willingness to get out of our comfort zones, and dip our toe in the water. And like I said, I know it's easier said than done. I am probably more in the middle right, but I still push myself. It's not something I run towards, but I know that I will learn more and I will grow more if I do that.
I see. Would you say that a personal character may be predisposed to that, or is it failures as well, or other people who actually put you in difficult situations and push you to challenges that really lead to you stretching yourself and breaking those boundaries?
Well, I mean,
Probably
I'm glad you brought that up because people need to know that. I think it's all of the above.
All of the above, right?
But if people don't put you in those situations, I think it's incumbent upon you, if you want to grow, to put yourself in those situations.
Yeah, great. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, Sara, I'd like to ask you, what are some qualities or reasons in which you need to stand firm, particularly the next generations, throughout this time of change? Because I know you talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah. And so, in the book, I end the book by saying, I've given a lot to some what might be counterintuitive strategies, right? To zig while everybody else is zagging. But then I end the chapter in saying, okay, here are the success principles of a leader that will never change. They will stand the test of time, and that they should stay firm in. And, there are plenty of them, but I chose to pick out, 4 or 5. And there are things like right now is your presence as a leader is critical. And what I mean by that is being fully present with whoever you're with at the time, whatever you're doing at the time. So staying completely focused on your work. Because right now in this day and age, distraction is overboard. We have so many things to distract us. So it's about not only focusing, but if you can also be present with people, I think you will, again, learn more, as we talked about before, and they will be richer for your presence, right? It's a gift that you can give others, and frankly, it's a gift you can give yourself. And I mentioned things like, integrity. Integrity as a leader, doing the right thing, even though it may not be popular.
Right.
Working towards results and achievement as much for others as you do yourself, right? So goes to the greater good. And I've seen the best leaders really think well beyond themselves. They are thinking about the team and they're thinking about the company. And then I would say the last one, the one that I know you have such passion around, is the idea that your role as a leader is to develop other leaders. Not necessarily leaders in title, but just leaders in spirit, right? To help people fulfill their potential. And that's one of the biggest purposes of leadership there is.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Now, your book, in terms of the readers that you had envisioned, what type of reader you think would benefit most from your book? Would it be a student, a fellow, such as the ones that I spoke to, a current leader, a next generation leader? Can you tell me a little bit about who you intended the book for?
Leadership Unchained.
Leadership Unchained.
Yeah, so I wrote it based on my observations and conversations with leaders every day. And I saw how overwhelmed they were.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like walking to-do lists and firefighters. And I think that they felt their purpose had lost its meaning.
Yeah.
And so I wrote it for the leader who feels that way, but I am finding that it is just as valuable to emerging leaders, project managers, program managers, entrepreneurs, anybody who's caught up in our always on do more world, frankly. It would be of value to. And so I'm hearing that among the people that have read it and have had conversations with me. But my initial thought was, I'm going to write this for the leaders who are just exhausted and they're trying to keep up with the demands by using old conventional practices.
Yeah, great. Well, I invite all the listeners to our discussion here to take your courses on LinkedIn, to read your book, because speaking about a pause and that necessary pause, standing firm in a time of in this whirlwind in which we're living, that was certainly one aspect that came out from your book, from your courses that I completed. They challenged the norm. They challenged the regular leadership course and its curriculum. So it was obvious to me, it was clear that you took an important pause to provide a multidimensional look and a very global outlook on leadership. So I definitely invite everyone to go to LinkedIn. And I think you have LinkedIn Live. Do you go on LinkedIn Live as well? Oh, you do?
I did a series earlier this season, and there are 5 in that series. And I, in fact, am going to post that soon so that they're all together. But if they just search for it, they'll find it. And then I'm working on another series for probably the winter season.
Okay, great. And where can people contact you? You have a website, correct?
Absolutely, yes. Sara Canada, and it's Sara, no H. And Canada is just like Canada with a Y at the end.
Yes.
And I'd love to connect via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, any way your followers prefer to get their information.
Sure. If there's one message that you would have for our listeners, for your network, your friends, what would that be?
I would say that it may sound corny. And in fact, for years, I sort of avoided talking a lot about it when I did workshops or keynotes. And that is to kind of get back to your core purpose. What is your North Star as a leader? What are you there to really do? And who are you there to serve? And the reason I say that is because your purpose is what can really anchor you during a time that seems insurmountable and questionable and anxious. So, but if you can keep going back to your North Star, to your purpose, that is just a really good way to keep you grounded. And so, you can do that by taking some real serious pauses and reflecting on that.
Yeah, thank you. I could not agree more. I think it's about our adaptability, our personality and character that you have to develop with that purpose. I speak about character quite a bit on All Out Coach. So I share my sentiments with you completely. Thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing your next presentation on LinkedIn or across social and continue our dialogue. Thank you.
Excellent. I enjoyed it. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.